first guest, I'm going to go ahead and turn this mic over tonight to Mike Berry, all the way from Austin, Texas. I didn't realize, well, he's got family everywhere, but all the way from Dallas, Texas. He was born in Sapulpa, and I don't know, I can't figure out, I think for sure he's something Texas. I don't know what fan he is, but he's got an OU fan. He's got a dad who graduated from Oklahoma State, and we're just very excited to have him here tonight. And I'm just going to turn it over. Would you guys give a round of applause to our first guest, Mike Berry?
Slide this over like this so that I can, at least, if I don't sit on something, I'm going to end up wandering around the stage, and I know we've got a camera here. I want to make sure I don't make the cameraman's life miserable. Can everybody hear me okay? All right, well, thank you for having me. It's really a privilege to be back up in Oklahoma again. As Coach said, I am a native Okie. I was born in Sapulpa, but I actually haven't spent too much time in Oklahoma in my life, other than visiting a lot of the relatives that I have up here. I am an attorney with First Liberty Institute. I serve there as our chief of staff. We're based in Plano, Texas, which is just north of Dallas, and we are a national religious liberty law firm. That's the only thing we do is defend religious freedom coast to coast, and we're also a nonprofit, so we do so free of charge. Coach Kennedy and every other client we have never receives a bill from us for our legal representation and services. The only way we're able to do that really is through donations. We're 100% donor funded, and there are people across the country who obviously hear about us. They appreciate what we do. They value our constitutional rights and freedoms, and they support us, and we're very grateful for that. A little bit about me. I joined First Liberty about 6 years ago, a little over 6 years ago. After serving in the Marine Corps, I was on active duty as a judge advocate, a lawyer. Some people call us JAGs. And I did that for just shy of 8 years on active duty. I continue to serve in the reserve, same thing as a lawyer in the Marine Corps. But about 6.5 years ago or so, I felt God calling me to change missions. And the interesting thing is, obviously in our military we swear an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. I feel like that's still what I'm doing, right? I'm still defending the Constitution. I just wear a different uniform now than I did when I was on active duty. In terms of my background, as Coach was asking, so I attended Texas A&M University for undergrad, so I'm a proud Aggie. So I can't stand Longhorns, Sooners, Cowboys, Red Raiders, any of y'all. So, especially rolling Crimson Tide. I can't stand Alabama. And then for law school, of all things, I attended the Ohio State University. So I'm also a proud Buckeye, and so if we got any Michigan Wolverines in here, you might as well just stand up and walk out now. So yeah, I attended two big sports schools, which I guess keeps my closet filled with paraphernalia. But I'm here tonight not to talk about me, but to talk about Coach Joe Kennedy and this case. And I thought the easiest way to really talk to you guys about Coach Kennedy is to break this up, to tell the story in 3 parts. So it's a three scene play, right? A 3-act play. And part 1, I'm going to set the scene for everybody, so you get an idea of who Coach Kennedy is, why he does what he does. Part 2, I would title that, chapter 2, I would title that No Good Deed Goes Unpunished. And then chapter 3, as I wrap up, I will title that one, Do Justice, Love Mercy, and Walk Humbly with God. And then, as Coach said, we'll take a break, and then after the break, I'm happy to answer any questions that you all might have. And through that, hopefully through telling the story and so on, you'll also begin to learn more about what our rights are as coaches. And not only as coaches, but really as American citizens. So part 1, Coach's background story. And I'm going to move pretty quickly because I want to make sure I stay on time. I've known Coach now for probably the last 4 or 5 years, and I've gotten to know him pretty well. He's also a U.S. Marine, which I'll talk about in a minute. So we Marines kind of stick together. And I've really gotten to know and love Coach as not just as a client, but just as a person. Coach grew up in Bremerton, Washington. Bremerton is a working class, very, very blue collar, hard scrabble community across the Puget Sound from Seattle. Trying to think of something that would be similar in Oklahoma, and I can't really think of anything off the top of my head, but just imagine kind of a hard scrabble, blue collar. There's a big shipyard there in Bremerton, so that's where a lot of the people go. And there's a lot of broken families and broken homes in Bremerton, just as there are really in communities all across the country. And Coach came from one of those families. He was an orphan, and when he was a young boy, elementary school age, a family decided to adopt him and bring him in because they were told that they could not have biological children of their own. And so they adopted him, and things seemed to settle down for Coach for a while, but lo and behold, that family was able to have biological children. And as Coach describes it, he was no longer required. And so they put him out again, and he was back out on his own. And as Coach says, he never spent any amount of time in a school, orphanage, boys' home, group home that he never got kicked out of. He said, I've never attended a school, orphanage, or group home that I didn't get kicked out of in my life. And I said, well, tell me about that. He said he would just bounce from one to the other. I said, how did you survive? He said, this is up in the Seattle area where it gets pretty cold and wet, right? And he said, he recalls one night, he learned at a young age that it was a lot easier to break into churches to spend the night, to get out of the cold and wet, because they didn't seem to, kick you out quite as frequently. And he described a scene to me when he was probably middle school or so, or maybe high school. He broke into a Catholic church, and he said it was one of those really old churches where they still had wooden pews and they still had candles and everything, and just a really, really old church. But it was a really cold, wet night. And he said, I was trying to crawl up on one of those pews to stay warm and dry, but the cold, wet was soak into the wood, and then the heat from the candlelight would cause it to dry and expand, and it would cause the wood to creak and moan. And he said that he didn't get a wink of sleep because he was scared to death of all the noises that the church was making. And I'm just thinking to myself, I've never had to experience anything like that, but for a young boy to have to go through that by themselves, that's a pretty vivid scene. So, Coach was also a fighter. By that, I don't mean it in a good way, I mean it in a bad way. He got into a lot of fights, probably understandably so, because he was an angry young man. He was angry at the world, he was angry at God, and he had a chip on his shoulder. And he also played sports, though. That was his outlet, fighting and sports. And he kind of figured, he could kind of combine the two a little bit, right? When he played football, he was able to take out some of his aggression on the gridiron. After high school, he didn't really know what he wanted to do. He said he'd never paid attention in school or anything, so his grades were terrible. But he thought, I need to join the Marine Corps because they'll teach me how to fight for real. And this was back during Desert Storm in the 90s. So he joined the Marine Corps. He deployed in Desert Storm, Desert Shield to defend our country and defend our freedoms. And he spent 20 years in the Marine Corps, finally retiring as a gunnery sergeant. He retired maybe 9 or 10 years ago now. And when he retired, he realized that right around the time he retired is when he realized that he had a hole in his heart, and that hole and that void could really only be filled by God. And he had returned back to his hometown of Bremerton after retiring from the Marine Corps, and he met his childhood sweetheart again. He told me that his wife Denise, he said, I met her for the first time in elementary school, and I walked up to her in the first grade and I told her, I'm going to marry you. And he returned back to his hometown after retiring from the Marine Corps, and that's exactly what he did. So Joe and Denise are married to this day, And really Denise was played a big role in helping Coach come to faith in God and place his faith in Christ. And again, that was right after he got out of the Marine Corps. So his world kind of got turned upside down, you know. He finally has a family now. He's got some stability in his life. He's got a nice pension check rolling in every month. And now he's got this new thing called, you know, salvation and faith. And he's trying to work all that out, and he's totally new to it. And as Coach says, he says, really, I don't know a lot about the Bible. The only thing I know is that it says love God and love people, and that's what I'm going to try to do. And that's how he lives his life. Love God and love people. Well, he's a runner. Coach is a runner, and I'm a runner, and I'll tell you a funny story about that in a minute. But Coach was out running one day, and the high school athletic director saw him, pulls over on the side of the road, and says, hey, didn't you go to Bremerton High School? And he said, I did. And he goes, what have you been doing? He goes, I was in the Marine Corps. He goes, you're a Marine, huh? And he goes, how'd you like to be a football coach? And he said, you know, what? And he goes, you know, you look like you know how to motivate some guys. You served. The kids will look up to you. Why don't you be a coach? And he thought about it, went home and talked to Denise about it, and he just didn't feel like the timing was right. So he said no. But the athletic director didn't leave him alone. He kept pestering him. So finally, after several months of this, it was already too late for that season, but the next season was coming up, and he goes, why don't you coach next season? And he said, all right, I'll go home and think about it. And he went home and he prayed about it, and he felt like, you know, he had wasted so many opportunities in his life, and here he had been given this second chance, right? The opportunity, just as we said during the intro, to be a positive role model and a positive influence, and to pour into these kids. And he knew the backgrounds that these kids had, the broken homes, broken families that they came from, many of them probably very similar stories to his own. And he thought, man, if I could help just one of these kids, or at least just be there for him as a coach, I feel like I need to do that. And he watched a movie that night, and many of you probably are familiar with this movie. The movie is called Facing the Giants. And he watched the movie Facing the Giants, and Coach said he was watching that movie, he fell to his knees and started weeping, because he knew at that moment that he had to accept the offer to coach, but that he made a promise as well. And if he was going to coach, he promised God right then and there. He said, if I take this job to be a high school football coach, God, he said, no matter what, win or lose, the team plays great, the team plays horrible, I'm going to give you all the glory and all the credit for this opportunity. I'm going to thank you for the opportunity to be a coach. And if somebody got hurt, then, you know, I'm going to ask you to heal them, but I've got to give you the glory and the praise for this opportunity. And that was the promise he made. And that was back in 2008 was when that started. And from the very first game he ever coached as a coach, he was the assistant varsity coach. He eventually became the head coach of the JV team at Bremerton High School. Now I got to tell you something real fast about Bremerton. I got to go up there and watch Bremerton High School play. I played 2 years of high school football for a big, you know, now they call it Class 6A, but at the time it was 5A in Houston. All right, so you can imagine a big 5A school out of Houston, and the type of crowds and the level of intensity in football that's played in Houston, in Texas, and, you know, Oklahoma as well, right? I get up there to Bremerton, and it's whatever they call it. It's not football. All right, I'm sorry to tell you. And I kind of looked at Coach and I said, "What are you guys doing?" He goes, "What do you mean?" I said, he goes, "We're playing defense." I said, "That's what you call it?" He's like, so anyway, I had to make a quick plug for Texas and Oklahoma football, because I said, look, I learned really quick, I need to stop playing football and just focus on soccer. I learned that after 2 years. I said, I'm pretty sure at my age I could step out on that field and be a star running back for your team right now. So anyway, he made that promise to God, and he kept it from day one. I mean, from the very first moment he was a coach, as soon as the clock hit zeros, he dropped to a knee. And I tell when I talk to kids about this, I say, you guys probably refer to this as Tebowing, right? And I said, but Coach it was Kennedying before it was Tebowing, right? I said, Coach was doing this way back in 2008. I guess Tebow, that was probably when he won the national championship, so he's probably doing it back then too. But that's exactly what he did. It looked just like Tebow, except he just dropped to a knee and said, 15 to 30 seconds, Dear Lord, thank you for the opportunity to coach these kids. Please just let me be a good coach and be a good influence on them. Amen. You know? And after about 2 or 3 games, some of his players walked up to him, and he said they were kind of snickering. They were like, Coach, what are you doing out there? He says, what do you mean? He goes, what are you doing after the game? And he said, just give it thanks. Give it thanks for what? Just give it thanks for what you guys just did. Just give it thanks for the opportunity to be your coach. And then it went on for a couple more games, and then a couple of them approached him again. And they said, hey, Coach, are we allowed to do that? You know, are we allowed to take a knee and circle up? And his answer is classic Coach Kennedy. He says, it's a free country, you can do whatever you want. All right? And that's what they did. And over the course of years, starting in 2008, for about 6 or 7 years, that kind of became the Bremerton High School tradition, right? As often these things happen, that's how these things often happen, right? It just kind of, the first domino goes, and then it starts to build from there. And eventually, it was just a couple of guys from the team, and then it became most of the guys from the team, and then it became, you know, almost every player on the team would just, and it became more of a motivational post-game pep talk, if you will. But that's what they did, and that became part of their tradition. So that's part 1, right? That's chapter 1. Okay, Coach's background story. I've just set the scene for you guys. Now, transitioning to chapter 2, what happens next? In 2015, the 2015 season, he's an assistant coach or the assistant athletic director, I can't remember which, from a different school district. All right, they had just played a game with Bremerton, and they see this happening after the game, this post-game tradition, where Coach is out there taking a knee, and the players are gathered up, and they're taking a knee as well, and there's kind of this post-game motivational pep talk. And that coach or assistant AD from the other school district approaches the athletic director from Bremerton School District and pays a compliment, says, hey, that's really awesome. I just want to, give you kudos and props for what you guys are doing out there. And he goes, what do you mean? He goes, just the coach and the players and everything gathered up like that and praying, that's pretty awesome. And I titled this chapter, No Good Deed Goes Unpunished, because as a result of that compliment, the Bremerton athletic director said, we may need to look into that and see if that's legal, right? And then that's pretty much Shakespeare said the first thing we need to do is kill all the lawyers, right? Probably for good reason, because that's how every bad story starts, is when somebody says, hey, let's get the lawyers involved and find out if we can do this or not. And that's basically what happened. Bremerton School District, they did their little investigation, and they sent a letter to Coach. And mind you, First Liberty Institute, I've never heard the name Joe Kennedy in my life up to that point, unless you're talking about politicians from Massachusetts, right? I wouldn't know Joe Kennedy from Adam at that point. They sent him a letter saying, hey, we've done an investigation into your post-game activities. You need to stop, right? You could be violating the Constitution. You can't be leading kids in prayer, so on and so forth, right? And Coach is kind of freaked out by that. He's like, what did I do wrong? And he said, okay, what do I need to do? And they said, just stop doing it. And it was about that time that, and then they told him as well, because, if you don't comply, then, you could face adverse action to include suspension or termination. And it was about that time that Coach posted on his Facebook page, hey, I think I may have just been fired, or I'm about to be fired for praying. That doesn't sound right to me. Remember, he's a Marine, okay? He's a fighter, and just when it doesn't pass the smell test, he just was like, that just doesn't feel right. So he posted it on his Facebook page. Well, it was kind of like the telephone game. Somebody saw that on his Facebook page, they tagged somebody else or shared it with somebody else, who shared it with somebody else, and eventually it ends up coming to our attention. Okay, and that was October of 2015. And I'll never forget, it was a Friday evening. Right? I just finished a long week at work. and I just got home, walked into the house, out of the garage. I put my bag down, all my stuff, and I was really looking forward to just kicking back and watching some college football the next morning, because it was October, right? October in Texas is like the best time of year because you got football, the weather's finally nice, and I was looking forward to the weekend. And I get a text from my boss, right? And it says, "Where are you?" And I said, "In my bedroom." And he said, and the next text said, "Need you to go to the airport ASAP." And I responded, "Why?" And the next text said, "We just booked you on a flight to Seattle." So I literally took my phone, I held it up to my wife and showed it to her. And my wife, she knows, as a Marine, and she's a Marine wife, she knows, when you got a mission, you got to go on mission. And so she just hugged me, gave me a kiss, and she said, "We'll see you when you get back." And I said, "All right," and I went and said bye to the kids and everything. And then I realized as I was packing my bag, I was thinking, how many suits am I going to need? I was checking the weather in Seattle to see how cold it was going to be or whatever. And so I texted back and I said, "Hey, how long am I going to be gone? I'm packing my bag now. I need to know how long am I going to be gone." The response I got was, "Don't know. Haven't booked return flight yet." So that's kind of how First Liberty rolls, right? So you just, I made sure I left enough room in my bag so if I had to buy a heavy coat or something like that, I had enough room. I flew up there. And I'd never spoken with Coach at that point. I literally never talked to him. I'd never met him. I didn't know what he looked like. I just knew that there was a football coach who was on the verge of being fired or being threatened with being fired because he prayed after a football game. And that's really all I knew. And I finally landed in Seattle 4 hours later, and I'm getting into a rental car, and I'm driving out towards Bremerton, which is about an hour and a half or so from the airport. As I'm driving out there, they had sent me his number, said, "Hey, make contact with him when you get there." So I called him, and I'm like, "Is this Joe Kennedy?" He's like, "Yeah, who's this?" And I said, "This is Mike Berry." I introduced myself, and I said, I'm heading out your way right now. But it was really late at that point, right? Because if I got home at like 6 o'clock at night, and I caught a flight, it was like midnight in Seattle, or no, they're 2 hours behind. So it would have been midnight Texas. But it was still like 10 p.m. out there, but it was pretty late. And he goes, "Do you want to meet up tomorrow morning?" And I said, "Yeah, where do you want to meet? You want to meet for breakfast or something?" And he goes, "Well, I'm actually running in a 10K trail race. I hope you brought shoes." And I'm a runner, right? And so I always pack my workout stuff when I travel. And I was like, "Well, as a matter of fact, I do." And so he goes, "All right, I'll make sure we register you for the race." And he just gave me the address, and I showed up, and that was the first time I met him, was running a 10K trail race with my brand new client. So that was kind of, again, that's how First Liberty rolls. And so I start talking to him. We're going through all the facts. I need to know everything that's happened up to this point. I got to know everything that's going on. And we go through it. And basically, not to bore you with the details and to make a long story short, this is the conclusion we came to. Okay, the school has asked you or ordered you, stop praying with your players. Right? They've ordered you, stop praying with your players. You can't lead your players in prayer in a public high school. And we said, okay, we're going to tell them, you will comply with that. You will comply with the order to stop praying and leading your players in prayer. But we will make sure they know that you, as an American citizen, all right, you have the right to continue praying by yourself if you choose, okay, away from your players. And because remember, the players first asked him, "Can we do that?" Right? And that's how they initially prayed. The players were over there. As one of the former student athletes said, the coach did his thing, and we did our thing in the beginning. And then just over time, it kind of melded together. But initially, it was coach did his thing, players did their thing. And basically, that was my position to the school was, let's go back to that then. All right? And just because players, student athletes, even in a public school, just because they gather together to pray, and if they choose to do that, he as the coach, and this is the language we use, the law does not require him to flee the scene like a criminal, right? He doesn't have to flee the scene. He doesn't have to run away just because he sees a group of his players huddled up praying, right? He can say, well, I'm just going to pray right here, you know? And as long as there's enough physical distance between the two so that it's obvious that he is not leading them or joining them and influencing them in what they're doing, if it's student initiated and student led, then that's fine. And at first the school districts seem to be okay with that, right? School districts seem to be like, okay, coach is doing his thing, players are doing their thing. And then, I mean, I still don't understand it to this day. They came back and they said, well, okay, actually now yes, the students have a right to pray by themselves. That's clear. The law is clear on that. You can't prevent students from praying. But he's a public school employee. If somebody sees him praying, they might interpret that as the school, aka the government, is endorsing religion, right? And they said, so coach is not allowed to pray. Right? And this is where things really went off the rails with the school district. Because, all right, we've established the students have their rights. So we can kind of set that to the side. Well, what about coach's rights? Okay? What about his rights as a coach? And that's what the fight became over. Okay? Is a public school coach allowed to pray by himself, not with students? And then they said, well, I mean, he could be, it could be a distraction or a disruption. We said it'll be 15 to 30 seconds. And they said, well, people are going to know that he's praying, and they're going to feel pressured to get involved or to join him, or they're going to think that. We said, what if it's silent? What if you can't hear him? And like, well, we still know what he's doing. I said, well, how do you know what he's doing? He's taking a knee on the field, 15 to 30 seconds, and you can't hear a word. All right. I said, how do you know he's not looking for a lost contact lens? How do you know he's not tying his shoe? And they said, we just know, because he's prayed in the past. And so basically they were saying there's nothing that he could do to somehow avoid, in their mind, this risk that somebody might see him doing this and think, oh goodness, the government's establishing Christianity as religion, right? Because one coach happens to be taking a knee by himself, and you can't even hear what he's doing. So at that point, we thought that's a fight worth fighting legally. I mean, I probably got to take a quick aside here and say, even though we're a nonprofit law firm that specializes in religious liberty, one of my favorite things to tell our younger attorneys, I said, yes, we do not back down from a fight. I said, but we also don't lead with the chin either, or as our president and CEO loves to say, stupid for Jesus is still stupid, So, I'm sure a coach or two has used that one back in the day, right? So we don't do things that are foolish or reckless. So I'm not going to lead a coach to do something that's clearly a violation of what courts have said you can't do. I'm not, and we had to know, what is this fight over? And if the fight with the school district is over, whether a coach can pray by himself for 15 to 30 seconds where nobody can hear him, okay? And we said, we're willing to take that on as a fight. Because come on, that's clearly not what the Constitution means, right? Is that a public school coach can't do that, or a public school employee, a teacher, anybody can. So at that point, we were at an impasse with the school district. They would not budge from that. They said, if he does it again, he will receive discipline. And we looked at Coach and we said, what are you going to do? And he said, I'm a Marine. I don't back down from this. I spent 20 years defending this country, giving up my own freedom, putting my life on the line for everybody else's freedoms. And now the school district's going to tell me that I don't enjoy the same freedoms that I fought for. They picked the fight with the wrong Marine. I thought I was going to get up and start saying the Pledge of Allegiance or something at that point. But we tried to work things out with the school district, and they refused to work with us. And so at that point, we knew we had to file a lawsuit. And so that's where we get to chapter 3, all right? Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God. We filed a lawsuit against the school district in federal court. And the main objective, the main objective is to obviously to protect coaches' constitutional rights, okay? But our secondary objective is that was in 2016. So he had now missed the entire 2015, not the entire, but he had missed a lot of the 2015 season, and we were rapidly approaching the 2016 season. And he was getting really antsy and saying, my guys, they need me. I need to be out there with my guys. I just want to be back on the sidelines. And so one of the things we asked for in the lawsuit was for them to reinstate coach immediately on the sidelines. And you do that legally through something called a preliminary injunction, which basically the court orders one side to do something or stop doing something. In this case, what we wanted the court to do is order the school district to reinstate him as a coach. So we had a hearing with the judge, and I'll never forget, I flew up there for the hearing. I've made many trips to Seattle, Washington from Dallas. I have quite a few frequent flyer miles in my account these days. And I flew up there for the hearing. It was in Tacoma, Washington. And I'll never forget the judge. You could tell he was distressed and perplexed by this. And he said, what coach does is a really great thing. He's obviously beloved by his players. He's a great guy. Everybody in the community loves him. He goes, you just can't do that in these days, in this day and age. You just can't do that anymore. So basically what he was saying was times have changed, right? Just the fact that he does something that's a good thing, the fact that, he's tried to comply with the school district, and he just wants that one little piece of his constitutional rights. He's like, he said, and the judge said, because you're a coach 24/7, you're never off duty. And so, where do you draw the line? And people could see that and think that, that this is somehow the government endorsing religion. And of course, that's not what the Constitution says, right? The Constitution originally prohibited Congress from creating any law respecting the establishment of religion. And we wanted to remind the judge, don't forget the other part of that, though, where it says, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And coach has rights, too, as a U.S. citizen, as a veteran, right? But the judge issued his order, so we had to file an appeal to, of all places, the Ninth Circuit, right? And I don't know how familiar you guys are with the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, but they are, they're pretty liberal, They have the highest reversal rate at the Supreme Court. Actually, this past term in the Supreme Court, 14 cases from the Ninth Circuit were heard by the Supreme Court, and 12 of them were reversed. So they're back 2 for 14. Yeah, 2 for 14 at the Supreme Court this last year. So that tells you how they're doing. So we filed our appeal to the Ninth Circuit, and we had a hearing. So I had to fly up there again at the Ninth Circuit. And they issued a decision, and I am not exaggerating in the slightest when I tell you that this is what the decision said. What the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals said, that Coach Kennedy does not have the first, he is, as an employee of a public school district, he is not protected. The Constitution does not protect him when he does something that's religious, right? He engages in religious activity or religious conduct or religious expression that is visible to a member of the public, right? And the school district is justified in terminating him and firing him if he does that. And we were just flabbergasted, right? Because if you think about what that means, if you are a public school employee and you do anything religious that is visible to a member of the public, and we kept reading the opinion to see if they had any caveats or conditions or exceptions, and there were none. So that basically means, in the Ninth Circuit now, which covers a huge percentage of our population, right? California, Oregon, Washington State, Arizona, Idaho, Montana, right? If you're a public school employee, you don't even be a coach, you're just a teacher, and you're in the cafeteria, all right, and you want to say grace before your meal, somebody can see you do it, school can fire you for doing it. If you wear a cross necklace, right, school can tell you to remove it or they can fire you. And we said, look, what about a Muslim teacher who wears a head covering? That's a visible expression of faith. Apparently they can be fired for that if somebody can see it. or a Jewish teacher who wears a yarmulke. All right, and the Ninth Circuit left no escape hatch for those types of things. And that's now the law of the Ninth Circuit, okay? And other courts who are not in the Ninth Circuit, other states, like Oklahoma, which is in the 10th Circuit, okay? It's conceivable that if a case came up in the state of Oklahoma, or Kansas, or Texas, or wherever, and there was no controlling case law, they could look to what the Ninth Circuit did and say, yeah, we're not bound by that, but we're strongly persuaded by that decision and that analysis and that ruling. And so we had to file an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. We just couldn't let that stand. Even though less than 1% of all appeals are filed to the Supreme Court that does the court take. And like 8,000 cases that are sent to the Supreme Court every year, they only hear about 80 of them. So you've got about a 1% chance of having the Supreme Court hear your case. And unfortunately, we fell in the 99%. They did not hear our case, but in an extremely rare move, all right, even though they denied hearing our case, they issued a statement it's called a statement respecting the denial of review, okay? And in that statement, 4 of the justices, the 4 conservative justices on the court, issued, and they don't have to do this, there's no requirement that they do this, they just did it on their own. And they said, number 1, yes, we're not hearing the case right now, but that doesn't mean we won't hear it in the future, because that trial judge, the one who initially ruled against us, he didn't do enough analysis in his determination. He did not make it clear on the record as to whether Bremerton fired Coach because he was praying or because of some other reason. Now, that some other reason is that Bremerton, the school district, in the litigation would often make the argument, well, if we let him pray, it'll take him away from his coaching duties. And we can't let coaches be taken away from their coaching duties to do, their own private thing like that. So our issue isn't really with him praying, it's because he's not being a coach. And he has, we need him to do his coaching duties after the game. Now here's the real interesting thing about that argument. During our negotiations with the school district before things went south, we asked them, we said, there's this thing in the law called a religious accommodation. We said, will you grant our client a religious accommodation? Will you accommodate his religious beliefs? Okay? And the school said, sure, we'll accommodate him. If he wants to do this, he can go into the locker room and pray where nobody can see him, or he can go up to the press box, which is way up at the top of the stadium, and he can go up there and pray where nobody can see him. But as long as nobody can see him, then we'll grant that accommodation request. And the funny thing about that is I've actually set foot in that stadium. Okay. Remember, their argument is if we let him do it, it takes him away from his coaching duties. It takes about a 7 to 9 minute walk to get from the field to the locker room. All right. Not sure what the value of that case would be other than for that one client, right? So it's really important to us to make sure we get the word out and educate people, because the fastest way for us to lose our rights is, number 1, to not take a stand for our rights. And that's why I'm so grateful for someone like Joe Kennedy, who said they picked on the wrong Marine, all right? Because if we don't stand up for our rights, we'll lose them. But how do we stand up for our rights if we don't even know what they are? And that's kind of the crisis that I'm seeing across the country, is that most people don't even know what their rights are. So how do they, they're like, Mike, I don't even know what I don't know. So how am I going to take a stand for something if I don't even know what I'm supposed to be standing for? And that is a valid question. And so that's why I tell people, know your rights and stay informed. And there's this resource out there, us, that is constantly pushing information to to anybody who wants it. So I really appreciate the privilege and the opportunity to speak to you all. I hope this has been informative, educational, and when we come back, I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have. Thank you.